Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ash's World. Today we have a special guest. We have Kasia Van Schaik. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Very good. My first question is perhaps a little bit tough, and then it gets easier as we go along. How would you briefly describe yourself to our audience here? And I know you're a woman of many talents. So, what would you say? In any way you see fit here, what would you like to say?
How to describe myself?
That's right.
I'm a writer, and before that, a reader, a voracious reader. Um, I was born in South Africa. Now I live in Canada, and I live in the Maritimes. And I'm also a professor of English literature and creative writing. So I've tried to find a way in which to bring all my interests together and form some kind of life.
Awesome. Yeah. But you also like drawing and you're good at that?
I do like drawing, and I teach a class on graphic novels as well. So, yes, I have a big interest in the arts as well.
Awesome.
Um,
So
yeah.
your book is Women Among Monuments, Solitude, Permission, and the Pursuit of Female Genius. Now, this is a kind of memoir, cultural criticism, and thoughts, reflections, and so on. But what would you say to our audience? What is it mainly about here?
It's for me, it's mainly about the question of how to live a creative life.
Mhm.
And it's a question I've held with me for many, many years now. It started off with thinking about, where are the women among, the monuments of history, and then kind of moved into thinking about what does it mean for a woman to live a creative life, which is, I think, still very much a resonant question. And so, to me, that's what it's about. It's about seeking that permission to live that life, to find the kind of balance of solitude and community, and um, and kind of also just to demand that life. Sometimes you
Mhm.
just have to demand it. So,
Yeah.
and I should say that by the end of the book, I don't have all the answers figured out. It's very much, as you say, a reflection and a meditation, but I feel like I come closer towards an answer.
So this was a question I think Virginia Woolf asked, like, where are the women among monuments? And that's a very valid question. And it's we
Mhm.
often don't think about these kind of things. And when you just like when the question comes up, you say, wait a minute, that's true. Where are they?
Yes, 100%. And so she was asking those questions, this I like thinking about female genius and that hidden those hidden histories, over 100 years ago now. But yet those questions are still so relevant, so resonant to our time now. So to me, it seems, I mean, they've changed a little bit, of course, since Virginia Woolf's time. And I think we have many more ancestors, many more women whose genius has been recognized, and including Woolf herself.
Mhm.
But yeah, these questions still remain, and I notice that they're still being debated in various ways across
And
the world.
you start in Padua in Italy.
Yes.
Yes. What's the story behind that?
So I was finishing up. It was interesting. I was finishing up my PhD doctorate, and I read this article. It was in 2022, about there's a great square in Padua, and it's only statues of historical men, famous men in the square, and they wanted to introduce a statue of a woman, the first statue of a woman to be introduced to the square, and that would be the um, Elena Piscopia, who's the first woman to ever receive a PhD. And so, of course, I was immediately interested because I was in the sort of throes of my own PhD. And this was a live kind of argument that was taking place. And there was a lot of backlash to the folks who were trying to, trying to secure that statue in that square. And in the end, they weren't able to convince the city to to kind of erect that statue in the square. So from what I understand, and I keep checking every now and again to see if she's in the square yet, but from what I understand, it's still a square full of male statues.
Yeah, yeah, and that starts off the book, and I think that there are very interesting thoughts and reflections here that I found. And so first of all, yes, the focus is mainly about women and the obstacles and so on, and absolutely valid. I think we've come a long way, but I think there's still so much more to go. And but just like when you have cases in the Supreme Court where there's a precedent, and when there's one case, and then you can build on that, and it can snowball in many ways if we keep pushing forward. But then I
Mhm.
also found a lot of things that doesn't apply to me, but a lot that does, you know.
Okay.
And so especially when it comes to that creative life, and you talk about art monsters, and what is that? And in a way, I can relate to that.
Yes, the art monster. And this is in recent years, I feel like this term has come into our kind of everyday vocabulary. Um, um, to think about or to maybe give a name to those artists that they only care about their art, and that's the only thing that's important to them in their lives, and they can behave badly, and they can hurt people, and etc. But we treat them as geniuses, right?
Mhm.
And
Right.
so I feel like the term is a little slippery, though. Historically, it really has been applied to well, male artists have really taken on that role, like Picasso, for example, and there are many others. Um, but I do think that there are examples of female art monsters, and
Mhm.
so it's it's not it's interesting because in the book I look to it as initially as something that you kind of want to aspire to be a kind of artist that has just seizes that permission and just feels like that's what they're here on earth for, is to create art. But at the same time, we don't want to be those kind of artists that hurt other people and put people down and trample over others, right? So I feel like it's a very slippery term, a slippery idea. It's
Yeah.
both something you want and something you don't want.
And it seems kind of in a way binary when it comes to that choice. I mean, the movie that a movie that really moved me was La La Land, and because of there's that choice, you know, do I choose to have a life and dedicate my life to art? Then that means like everything else is kind of like not as important, and I just focus on one thing, or do I want to have a life? And when you do that, then sometimes you do have to sacrifice, and especially, of course, for women, but also for men, because there is
Yeah.
a certain amount of compromise that you have to go through. And so in La La Land, he chooses the iron. That's a spoiler for those who haven't seen it. But then he kind of there's that sense of regret. And so I
Mm,
think either way, and there's somebody who loves the arts and would have liked to pursue it more, but I made a different choice. But in a way, either way, there's a
yeah.
sense of regret, or you think, what would have happened if I had taken that path? Now, is
Yeah.
that something that you can relate to? That again, choice we have to make. Do I dedicate myself fully to this, or do I live a life?
Right, right. Well, it immediately makes me think of the wonderful writer, well, one of my favorite writers, Jean Rhys, writer of the mid-century, early 20th century, died in the 60s, author of Wide Sargasso Sea. And at one point, she was in an interview, someone asked her about her art, and she said, you know what, I would I would have rather been happy. I would have given up all like she's a true genius, but I would have
Yeah.
given up everything just to be happy, so that really struck me. I'm happy that she didn't. I'm glad we have her books. So in some ways, like I'm sorry, Jean Reese, that you had an unhappy life, or at least parts of an unhappy life. But yeah, so to me, it feels really unfair that there should be that decision, that kind of binary, that choice between
Mhm.
living a more balanced life and being an artist. To me, I've definitely felt moments in my own life when I've like moments of testing when I felt like I've
Mhm.
had to make decisions based on that binary. And but I would really love to find a way to overcome that, and for
Mhm.
artists to to be able to make art without being a kind of sacrificial goat, culture, society's sacrifice. Um,
But you entitle your book "The Pursuit of Female Genius" and the pursuit of genius, you know, and I can relate to that because it is a kind of pursuit, like the pursuit of happiness. And the idea
mhm,
is also like in the U.S. Constitution, for example, the idea is not just happy as in like, you know, I have a lot of food and I drink and possession. No, it's like a fulfillment, like an
right,
emotional, spiritual fulfillment. And to
yeah,
a way, that's kind of something we're looking for, searching that kind of like fulfillment of like really dedicating, embracing art, creating art, and a life that is artful, basically.
yeah. No, honestly, I feel like people can't live without it, right? We sometimes think we can live without art. Um, but I don't think, I think even those who wouldn't call themselves an artist at all need some kind of creative force in their life. Like I really think it's part of what means to be human.
And the parts that resonated with me is again like it comes from aloneness, right? So
Mhm.
that kind of
Right.
a feeling, not feeling accepted. I grew up in Germany and from a different country, so I was always a foreigner in their view, and so that made me feel like outside of the common society. So I embraced art. I embraced German classical music and poetry and all that. And it became so much more than just, oh yeah, that's a nice poem or that's some nice music. It's like it's existential in many ways. And so and then you kind of like you said, you started off reading and then you say, well, I realized in elementary school there are all these books. People must have written them. So why don't I write? You know, and that's like my big moment of epiphany in grade two. It's like, wait, I could write stuff. And
Mhm.
I think that's like we're driven towards that, especially when we're suffering or where we don't feel at home, right? And
Yeah.
I feel quite like a restless nomad. And still, even within my family, I did not feel at home. So it's not just about culture or anything. It's just like this kind of alienation that we feel. And that's not necessarily a bad thing when it comes to the
Mhm.
arts.
Right. I mean, it makes me think of that whole, the oyster and the pearl, right? Like having
Yeah.
that little bit of agitation, that irritation
Yeah.
that you then start to turn into something quite beautiful.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I agree, and definitely moments of loneliness. But at the same time, in the book, I also think about how solitude is so important in order to create art. But then there've definitely been times I know in my own life when I felt very isolated and alone, and in fact, that wasn't always that didn't lead to a creative impulse. Like that could almost lead to a shuttering in.
Hmm. Sure.
I look at
Yeah.
some artists in the book um, um, that that I think, in fact, if they'd had a bit more community, there might have been even more creative. Perhaps I don't know. It's hypothetical, but I know for me, the times when I can feel really creative is when I'm I have that solitude, but I also know I have some kind of community or some kind of support out there. So it's um, yeah. So it's that's for me at least. It's this um, I can't be completely in the pit of despair.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely. But it's kind of like, I think like the point of view of Alfred Adler, where it's kind of drives you and that feeling of feeling inferior makes you work harder in many ways
Right.
to kind of prove yourself. So
Right.
as a drive, it's not necessarily bad. Again, it needs to be a drive. Yeah. You don't want to give up or crumble, but it can push you forward. And I think that it could be used as fuel, basically.
Yes. 100, yeah, absolutely, 100%. I agree with that. And um, even just for me, even just reading a really good book, I'm like, oh my God, I have to go back to square one, scrap what I've written before. This exists, right? And so making you try harder and
And
aim higher.
exactly, because it inspires. And that's just, and then again, good movies or good books. And they say, wait, yes, this is so good. Now I want to create. And I think
Yeah.
that's the best kind of art that kind of moves it on, like keeps the ball moving, the creative ball, so to speak.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So in the book, I've tried to um, as I kind of look at these different artists and biographies of these different artists, mostly 20th century artists and writers, I have tried to pick some of um, those artists that created that for me, that that either gave me that sense of permission or that moment of like, oh wow, you can do this, like you're allowed to do this. So yeah.
Yeah. And one thing that you mentioned is here also with memories, and I find that quite true. Oliver Sacks of like when we look back, we are recreating our memories. It's not really about the past event, and it's really about us now. And we're so the question that Gatsby asked, like, yeah, you can change. Of course, you can change the past. I agree with that. You can't change, of course, the facts of what happened, but how you feel about it. And once you
Right.
do that, it changes the whole perspective. The narrative changes completely when you're looking from now and you're looking back because you've gained insights and experiences. Now, I find that interesting is as you're writing a memoir, to what
Mm,
extent does that apply, where you're looking at the past and maybe being too harsh on yourself, too judgmental, or also maybe romanticizing certain things too, right? So,
sure.
how would that fit in with your writing process?
This is such a great question, especially since when I started the book, I did not think of it as a memoir at all. I thought
Uh-huh.
of it as a book of, you know, cultural analysis and criticism. And then I realized my way in was through story and bringing in a scene or an encounter, a little sliver from my own life, kind of brought the whole chapter to life for me. And so then I started adding a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit
Mhm.
more
Yeah, yeah,
until it
yeah.
became. Now we're kind of calling it a hybrid memoir. Um, yeah, and it's interesting you bring up Oliver Sacks, who I did cite in the book. I don't know if you read a recent article that came out in the New Yorker just 2 weeks ago or so,
I haven't.
which talks about how Oliver Sacks's own writing, his own memoirs, were largely fiction. And we
Mhm.
found this out now because they've been able to look at his archive, his letters, and we realize how much fiction was added. And I'm talking a lot, like full new characters, uh, you know, dialogue that never existed, etc. And so I feel after reading that, I was like, okay, well, I feel pretty good about staying closer to at
Makes me think of Carlos Castaneda, right? Carlos Castaneda of like just creating this like Yaqui Indian that never existed. But the thing is like there is so much wisdom in that. Now, whether it's a real person or
right.
fictional, there's so
Yeah.
much we can gain from it. And I think in a similar way, like Oliver Sacks actually did as he preached, right? Is like he
Yeah.
recreated new memories and he talks about this. So
Right.
so
Right.
yeah, there's that. But it's also like as you're saying the memoir part, I found that very interesting because just the essay part is interesting. The thoughts are interesting, but when you can combine it with lived experience and like your own
Mm,
thoughts and your travels across the world too, I mean that
yeah.
adds so much more color to it. So I'm glad you did that.
Yes, I'm so happy to hear that. I'm
Mhm.
and I had a few readers that also kind of were like more memoir, more story. So and I added that as I was doing the revisions. I would say I would say I try to stick to memory, and also I've kept a lot of notebooks over the years.
Mhm.
So I was able to kind of look back into those notebooks and get some key details. For example, when I go to art museums, I'll often write down notes from the reading material in the museum or kind of notes on my own experience, and so I was able to kind of draw on those as well for chapters that were spanning going back 10 years or so. And I would say for the most part, I don't think I'm being too nostalgic. I'm trying to kind of tell it like it is, at least as I remember it. But then I do notice there are moments where I think I can. We always kind of get nostalgic about youth. So look back into time in my 20s and oh, she had so much time then. She had the whole world before her. And then I think back at the time and I was just as anxious as I am now. So I didn't feel like that at the time. You always feel like that life is slipping away from you. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to capture that. I don't think I've honey coded anything too much, and mostly I've tried to keep it as close to fact as possible. There are moments where you kind of have to make up a bit of dialogue because you don't remember exactly what was
Of
said,
course. Yeah.
and sometimes kind of condensing two conversations that might have happened weeks apart into one conversation. Things, what Lee Gutkin calls the nonfiction dance, like
Mhm.
where you're having to use some of the tools of fiction in order to get at that emotional truth, which I think
Mhm.
you kind of
Yes,
referencing that
that's
emotional.
hugely important. Yes.
Yeah, but
And did you keep journals when you were younger? Or did you refer to that?
yeah, so I would say I don't have, because I've moved a lot, I don't have journals from when I was much younger, but I have journals from my 20s and 30s. So
Mhm.
um, uh, before life got way too busy. I have a lot of journals from when I, like a period of time when I was traveling and living in Berlin, and I love going back to those. There's lines of poetry that I've read, and images, and it kind of brings me right back into those moments. So I'm really happy to have, a bookshelf of those journals. I wouldn't even call them journals. They're more kind of just flaneur type speculations, just like
Nice. Yeah.
rag. They call the flaneur the rag picker. So they're just sort of rags of the world collected together in these books. So
Yeah,
yeah,
recently a friend had asked me if I wanted to go back to my 20s and relive that. And I just remember just stumbling upon my journal when I was that age, like
okay.
later teens, and reading it and just like approaching it like a fictional character and just all these things that I didn't remember, it just came out. And I said, God, no, I don't want to go through that again.
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
but the energy.
The energy is there, but then if I can go back, just to kind of not worry about things, not be so fearful,
Yeah,
of things, because it does turn out fine. And if we
right.
had that reassurance, then we'd live our life in a different way, I think.
I think so. I mean, 100% for me. If I'd known that things would turn out relatively okay, I would have. There's a lot of shitty jobs that I wouldn't have taken, and I would have clawed back that time and created more. I feel like I couldn't say no to work. Growing up, I grew up kind of, single mom, money was tight, and so I've always just said yes to work. And there's definitely been times when I've regretted that because just because when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else, which in my case was often like something creative, right? So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No, that's true. And I think that's something that with time I'm learning more and more, the boundaries, the importance of boundaries at work or in your personal life, because boundaries is not really limiting the other, but it's about giving value to yourself, to your
yeah,
time, to your existence. And when
yeah,
you see it like that, it just makes so much more sense. And that self-care is so important. It's not something selfish, but it's something that is necessary for existence so that you can help others, right? So you can always see it
yeah.
that way too. It's definitely not selfish.
I feel like I'm just learning this lesson now.
I learned it recently, so
Okay, okay.
there's no shame in that. Yeah, it takes a long time. But I want to think about also genius, like and in a way, I think it's maybe kind of overrated because we might romanticize it in many ways.
Yeah,
There was like an interesting thought that I saw like actually expressed in a film where they said, when you're looking at athletes, right, like basketball player, I mean, not all of us can become a pro. And so, but it seems that all of us think that, yeah, well, I can become a genius in again, whatever I choose, right? And
right.
that there are certain criteria that are there and that not everyone has, or people who have it might not realize it. Somebody like Van Gogh never thought of himself as a genius, but in retrospect, he actually thought he was not good, right? And
Yeah,
then like time looks at it, it's like, wait a minute, this is a work of genius. So often that kind of lapse of time in your own time, you're not recognized. Most
yeah,
geniuses are not recognized in their own time, and it's just afterwards, which is
yeah.
useless because then we can't bask in the glory, right?
That's true. Yeah, there's a whole chapter in the book on Gertrude Stein,
Hmm.
who I found to be a fascinating character because she was trying to claim genius in her lifetime, in her own
Mhm.
time. She didn't want to
Yeah.
wait until she was dead and that we
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, gave her that title, which we have done. I think many people would agree. One of the most innovative experimental poets that did so much for poetry. But in her time, she it's kind of incredible. I can't even imagine just writing and I knew three geniuses, Picasso and myself, and this one other
Uh-huh.
person who
Yeah.
you don't even know anymore, and kind of putting herself forward like that. In her time, she was the only one. She wrote about herself in third person. And I see it as a bit tongue in cheek, but at the same time, I'm like, well, there's some of us that might could actually benefit from a little a little bit of that sort of sense of self.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree that it is. I mean, it is quite a subjective title, really.
Mhm.
Someone I find a genius, someone another person might not think that way. So it is
Yeah.
this weird
Yeah.
slippery turn, but it's also
Yeah,
this.
exactly.
Yeah,
It's
but
that,
it's
and
also
also but madness too. Genius and madness, they're
right.
they're they're quite close to each other. And again, you might feel a genius, but others don't, or others might think you're a
Yeah.
genius and you don't because you might have imposter syndrome or you might doubt yourself. So it is that slippery slope. Exactly. It's kind of hard to pinpoint.
But it's also funny because the term genius, because we hear it so often, so ubiquitous, we think we know what it means, and we have a very clear idea, which is usually that like the artists like Picasso or Van Gogh or someone like that, right? This, um, but when you actually push upon the term a little bit more, then you realize that it all kind of falls apart a little bit. It's one of those things that yeah, it I think it can be approached in many different ways, and it's got such a weird history as well, which
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
I looked at in
Yeah.
the book as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with the art monsters too, there's like rock
Mhm.
star element that you can get away with anything. Yeah, like carte blanche and so on. You
Mhm.
can destroy hotel rooms and just like do use drugs and so on. And that's not to me, that's not what genius is about, right? It's
Yeah,
really should be really about the work that you create. But one thing
yeah.
I disagree with, where you're mentioning woman as a limiting category, right? The term woman.
Oh,
And for me, like woman is an infinite category, right? And
right.
just the fact of specifically, again, as a male, and this is something that we suffer and we don't really talk about, is the ability to give birth. And again, genius is giving birth. And so one of the reasons why men really might have pursued that is because they cannot give birth. So that's an element that something we cannot create life, so we create works in a way, right?
Mm.
So that there's an unconscious striving there because there's something that we can never access.
Yeah, that's certainly been the kind of historical narrative around that for sure. Like thinking about Athena jumping out of
Mhm.
Zeus's head.
Yeah,
So just the term when I mean what I meant by woman as a limiting category, it's really just the word woman, less the concept and
mhm.
more just I realize that language is evolving, and
Sure.
um,
Yes,
so
absolutely.
yeah, so there might be more inclusive and different terms in the future, but for
Mhm.
now I'm just kind of working with the tools I have.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then with that history of women giving birth and men giving birth through artistic creation, like that's definitely historically been the narrative. But I definitely take a bit of issue with it because it in itself is quite limiting as well to say that
Sure.
um,
Yes.
women's only mean of creation is childbirth, and
Mhm.
so yeah, so
Mhm.
that's one of those kind of
Mhm.
categories I'm
Mhm.
tackling.
Yeah,
Uh,
but
with
again, from the perspective of males, I mean, women obviously have more at their disposal. So in a way, that's kind of a disadvantage that men have. And one thing I think the permission, I'm not sure about why. I understand like there's these obstacles, but especially as we're moving forward, I think it's like overcoming those obstacles in any ways you see fit, and you don't need permission for that, especially for creating art. And that's we've seen that throughout history, where despite all these limitations, you have women writers who wrote as men, right, as well, just to make sure that the work comes out. So they don't accept, they don't need to ask for permission. So why did you include that in the in the title is my question.
So maybe what I should have had kind of what I meant is self permission. I don't mean permission from
Right.
someone else, right? So
Okay.
there's a whole the chapter is kind of looking at that.
Yeah.
Like what does it mean to give one to actually give oneself the permission?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
because you might have people, you might have everyone giving you the permission. You might have a grant and a prize, and that these are all forms of permission. But if you're not giving it to yourself, if you're
Hmm.
not allowing yourself to make that boundary, like you mentioned before,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
like these, then, and if you don't actually believe that you deserve that, then
Yeah. No,
it becomes a
that's
much bigger
hugely important.
psychological,
Yeah.
issue
Yeah.
than institutional.
And I can see that permission with parents where I asked, I would like to become a filmmaker. I would like to become a writer. And the immediate response was, what do parents say when you suggest
Become a
that, you
lawyer.
float it around?
Become a
No,
lawyer or a
become
doctor.
a lawyer, right? Do
Yeah,
something that brings in money, right?
yeah,
And I listen to them, right?
mm,
So, and again, that's when somebody who I would say probably who was a genius would just say, no, I'm just
yeah,
gonna do my own thing, right? And now but I've learned from that. And with my son, it's like, yes, do what your heart tells you. But we're also in a different time, right? So I do re respect that too. They grew up in a different time, and that's their limitation in a way because of that context. But again, I think again the self permission, yeah, of course, that you need to value yourself and you don't need anyone else's permission, I think.
yeah. No,
Yeah,
I agree with that.
yeah.
Yes, maybe
Awesome. Yeah.
I could change the title. I'll just say
No, no,
stop.
don't, don't, don't. This is just a thought. Again, I'm also like I like to push people to think, to come up with things, and you've done really well here. Yeah, awesome. Yeah. So again, Kasia Van Schaik, thank you so much here for being on Rash as well. You're an author, professor. Your book, memoir, and much more is called "Women Among Monuments: Solitude, Permission, and the Pursuit of Female Genius." And thank you so much for being here on the Rash as well. It's such a pleasure talking to you.
It's been a total pleasure. Thank you.